There comes a moment in life when the noise around you begins to feel heavier than the work itself. Not dramatic noise. Not chaos. Just constant pressure. The pressure to respond. To keep up. To stay emotionally available. To keep explaining yourself. To continue carrying thoughts that never seem to fully leave your mind. And strangely, many people reach a point where they no longer feel physically tired first. They feel mentally crowded. You may notice it in small moments. You sit down to rest, yet your mind keeps moving. You finish a task, but instead of peace, another thought immediately arrives. You wake up in the morning already carrying yesterday. And after enough years, many people begin asking themselves a quiet question they rarely say out loud. Why does life feel so heavy even when nothing is technically wrong? The Stoics understood this feeling deeply. Not because they lived easy lives. In truth, most of them lived through uncertainty, illness, political pressure, betrayal, loss, and instability. Yet what made Stoicism powerful was not the promise of controlling life. It was the realization that peace does not come from controlling everything. Peace comes from no longer fighting everything internally. That changes everything. Because so many people spend decades believing peace will arrive later. After retirement. After the children grow older. After the finances stabilize. After people finally understand them. After life becomes simpler. But life rarely becomes completely simple. There will always be another situation. Another opinion. Another responsibility. Another unexpected turn. And if inner peace depends on the world becoming perfectly calm first, then peace keeps getting postponed. This is why so many people appear successful on the outside while quietly feeling restless inside. The mind never learned how to stop gripping. Modern life quietly rewards this gripping. We are praised for worrying. Praised for overthinking. Praised for always being available. Praised for carrying everything emotionally. But the human mind was never designed to live in constant emotional tension. Eventually, the soul asks for space. Not more stimulation. Not more advice. Not more urgency. Just a space. A space to breathe mentally. A space to stop reacting to every little thing. A space to separate what truly matters from what only feels urgent. And perhaps this is where the Stoic path begins. Not with becoming emotionless. Not with becoming detached from life. But with learning the difference between carrying life and carrying unnecessary mental weight. Because they are not the same thing. A person can still love deeply without mentally clinging to everything. A person can still care without exhausting themselves. A person can still be responsible without making every problem part of their identity. This is one of the quiet truths many people discover later in life. The mind becomes lighter not when life disappears, but when unnecessary resistance disappears. And resistance often hides in places we barely notice. We resist aging. We resist change. We resist uncertainty. We resist other people's personalities. We resist how long healing takes. We resist not being fully understood. We resist reality itself. Not aggressively. Silently. Constantly. And this silent resistance slowly drains peace from everyday life. Marcus Aurelius once wrote in Meditations that much of human suffering comes not from events themselves, but from our opinions about them. At first, this sounds too simple. But the older a person becomes, the more visible this truth becomes. Two people can experience the same situation and carry completely different emotional weights afterward. One keeps replaying it for months. The other accepts it, learns from it, and continues walking peacefully. The event may be identical. The relationship with the event is different. And that relationship shapes the quality of inner life. This is why Stoicism is not merely philosophy. It is emotional clarity. It teaches that peace is not found by escaping life. Peace is found by seeing life more clearly. Without unnecessary drama. Without exaggeration. Without mentally adding extra suffering to ordinary human experiences. And perhaps this matters now more than ever. Because modern people are overstimulated but under-rested internally. The mind rarely pauses. Even silence has become uncomfortable for many people. The moment quiet appears, distraction quickly enters. A phone. A screen. A conversation. Background noise. More information. Anything to avoid sitting alone with the mind. But inner peace cannot grow inside constant mental noise. It requires stillness. Not perfect stillness. Just enough quiet to finally hear your own thoughts clearly again. And maybe that is why this conversation matters. Because many people are not truly searching for motivation anymore. They are searching for relief. Not relief from life itself. Relief from the constant pressure inside their own minds. The Stoics believe that freedom begins the moment a person stops demanding that reality behave differently before allowing themselves peace. That does not mean giving up. It means no longer fighting reality emotionally every second. There is great strength in that. Quiet strength. The kind that does not need attention. The kind that slowly softens the nervous system. The kind that helps a person breathe more deeply again. The kind that allows ordinary moments to feel enough. And perhaps the real tragedy is not that life becomes difficult sometimes. The real tragedy is how many peaceful moments people miss because their minds are always somewhere else. Thinking ahead. Replaying the past. Carrying imagined futures. Arguing internally. Trying to solve every uncertainty before it arrives. Meanwhile, life quietly continues passing by. A sunset. A quiet morning. A conversation. A cup of coffee. Rain against the window. A slow walk. A calm evening. Simple moments. Yet the restless mind often cannot fully enter them. And this leads us gently into an important realization. What if the problem is not that life is too heavy? What if many people have simply never been taught how to put certain mental burdens down? And once you begin seeing that clearly, an entirely different way of living starts to open. Which brings us to the next part of this journey. Because one of the greatest obstacles to inner peace is not suffering itself. It is a misunderstanding almost everyone carries without noticing. Many people spend years believing peace comes from finally arranging life correctly. If everything could just settle down. If people behaved better. If uncertainty disappeared. If the future became predictable. Then peace would naturally arrive. It sounds reasonable. But quietly, this belief creates a hidden trap. Because life is movement. It changes constantly. And when peace depends on controlling change, the mind remains tense almost all the time. This is one of the most common misunderstandings people carry. They believe inner peace is the reward for perfect external conditions. The Stoics saw something entirely different. They understood that external stability is temporary by nature. Air changes. People change. Circumstances change. Emotions change. Even identities evolve over time. Trying to create permanent emotional security from temporary conditions eventually exhausts the mind. Not because someone is weak, but because reality itself does not stay still. And once a person understands this deeply, something surprising happens. They stop trying to squeeze certainty out of every situation. That alone creates enormous mental relief. Because so many people do not realize how much energy they spend trying to emotionally secure themselves against uncertainty. They want guarantees. Guarantees in relationships. Guarantees in finances. Guarantees in health. Guarantees in the future. But life rarely offers guarantees. It offers moments, experiences, lessons, seasons. And strangely, peace begins growing the moment a person stops demanding permanence from temporary things. This does not make someone cold. It makes them calmer. There is a difference. A calm person still loves, still works, still hopes, still plans. But they no longer build their emotional stability entirely on things they cannot fully control. That shift changes how life feels internally. Imagine carrying a glass of water for 1 minute. Easy. Now imagine carrying it for 12 hours. The problem is not the glass itself. The problem is the constant gripping. The human mind often works the same way. Thoughts are not always the issue. Attachment to thoughts becomes the issue. A difficult conversation happens once, but the mind replays it 50 times. Someone misunderstands us briefly, but internally, we continue arguing with them for weeks. An uncertain future appears, and the mind tries solving every possible outcome immediately. This continuous gripping creates exhaustion that people mistakenly blame on life itself. But often, life is not crushing them. The mind's relationship with uncertainty is exhausting them. Epictetus, the Stoic teacher behind the discourses, often reminded his students that suffering increases when we confuse what belongs to us and what does not. Our actions belong to us. Our character belongs to us. Our choices belong to us. But many external outcomes do not. Other people's opinions. Timin. Ahin. Unexpected events. The past. Trying to mentally dominate these things creates endless tension. Yet modern culture rarely teaches surrender in a healthy way. It teaches control. Push harder. Optimize more. Fix everything. Predict everything. Protect yourself from discomfort at all costs. But ironically, the more aggressively people try to eliminate uncertainty, the more anxious they often become. Because uncertainty is not a mistake in life. It is part of life. And perhaps inner peace is not found by escaping uncertainty, but by becoming less afraid of it. This realization softens the nervous system. Suddenly, not every unanswered question feels dangerous. Not every delay feels personal. Not every change feels threatening. The mind becomes less reactive, more spacious, more grounded. And something else begins happening too. People stop taking every experience as a reflection of their worth. This is another hidden misunderstanding. Many people unconsciously believe, if something difficult happens, something must be wrong with me. But Stoicism teaches a very different perspective. Difficulty is not proof of failure. Change is not punishment. Uncertainty is not always a sign that life is going badly. Sometimes life is simply unfolding naturally. Like weather. Some days clear. Some days cloudy. So may days quiet. So may days uncertain. The wise person stops expecting emotional sunshine every moment. And because of that, they suffer less when clouds appear. This perspective does not remove pain completely. That is not the goal. The goal is to stop multiplying pain through resistance, interpretation, and mental dramatization. Many people unknowingly create secondary suffering. The original situation may be manageable. But the mind adds, "This should not be happening. What if it never changes? Why am I like this? I can't handle this." And suddenly the emotional weight becomes much larger than the original moment itself. Stoicism gently interrupts this process. It asks, what is actually happening right now? Not the story. Not the fear. Not the prediction. Just reality itself. Usually, reality is far lighter than the mean's interpretation of reality. This is why clarity feels peaceful. Not because problems disappear, but because the mind stops inflating them unnecessarily. And maybe this is one of the deepest forms of maturity. Learning to experience life directly without constantly adding emotional noise to it. Because so many people are not overwhelmed by life itself. They are overwhelmed by the non-stop mental commentary surrounding life. The Stoics understood that inner peace requires reducing this commentary little by little. Not violently. Not perfectly. Used gradually. Like setting down bags you did not realize you were carrying. And once a person begins doing this, they discover something surprising. Peace was never completely absent. It was simply buried beneath unnecessary mental tension. Which naturally leads to an even deeper question. If peace is not created by controlling life, then where does true inner peace actually come from? The Stoics had a beautiful answer to that. And understanding it can quietly change the way a person experiences everyday life forever. The Stoics believed something radically simple. A peaceful life is not built by controlling the world. It is built by learning how to meet the world calmly. At first glance, this may sound passive. But in reality, it requires enormous inner strength. Because reacting emotionally to everything is easy. Remaining steady requires awareness. Most people spend much of life trying to force internal peace from external order. But Stoicism reverses this entirely. It says, bring order to the inside first. Then the outside loses much of its power to disturb you. This does not mean becoming emotionally numb. It means becoming emotionally grounded. There is an important difference. Grounded people still feel sadness. Still feel disappointment. Still feel concern. But emotions no longer completely control the direction of their minds. They experience emotions without drowning inside them. And this shift often begins with one simple realization. Not every thought deserves belief. The modern mind is filled with automatic thoughts. Worries. Comparisons. Imagined conversations. Predictions. Self-criticism. Regret. Thoughts arrive constantly. But Stoicism teaches that awareness creates freedom. The moment a person notices a thought instead of automatically obeying it, space appears. And in that space, peace becomes possible. Imagine sitting beside a river. Leaves float by on the surface of the water. You notice them, but you do not jump into the river chasing every leaf. Thoughts can be approached similarly. A thought appears. What if things go wrong? The old mind immediately enters panic. The calmer mind notices the thought and lets it pass. Another thought appears. They should understand me better. Again, the calmer mind notices the attachment without becoming consumed by it. This is not suppression. It is observation. And observation weakens unnecessary suffering. The Stoics practiced this constantly. Not because they wanted perfect control over emotion, but because they understood something timeless. The quality of life is deeply shaped by the quality of attention. Where attention goes, emotional energy follows. If attention constantly chases irritation, fear, comparison, and imagined problems, the nervous system remains tense. But if attention returns to reality, to the present, to what is actually here, the mind gradually settles. This is why many peaceful people are not living perfect lives. They simply stop feeding unnecessary mental chaos. And often, this begins through ordinary moments. Washing dishes quietly. Walking without rushing. Drinking coffee without checking a phone. Watching the evening sky. Sitting silently for a few minutes before sleep. Simple moments become restorative when the mind stops fighting stillness. Modern culture sometimes makes peace appear boring. But the Stoics understood that inner calm is not emptiness. It is freedom. Freedom from compulsive reaction. Freedom from endless mental noise. Freedom from carrying every small irritation like a personal burden. And perhaps this freedom becomes more valuable with age. Because eventually people realize constant emotional intensity is exhausting. The soul longs for steadiness. Not excitement every moment. Not stimulation every moment. Just steadiness. The mind is constantly interpreting life. That is what it does. A situation happens. And almost instantly, the mind creates meaning around it. Sometimes helpful meaning. Sometimes painful meaning. But often, the interpretation becomes heavier than the event itself. This is one of the quiet discoveries at the heart of Stoicism. People do not merely experience life. They experience their interpretation of life. And interpretations are shaped by habit. For example, one person experiences silence from a friend and immediately thinks, "They must be upset with me." Another person simply assumes the friend is busy. Same situation. Different interpretation. Different emotional outcome. The Stoics paid close attention to this because they understood how quickly the human mind creates unnecessary suffering through assumption. And modern life intensifies this tendency. Today, people are exposed to endless comparison, endless opinions, endless emotional stimulation. The nervous system rarely rests. As a result, many people begin interpreting ordinary experiences through tension rather than clarity. A delayed message feels personal. A small mistake feels enormous. A moment of uncertainty feels threatening. The mind becomes overly sensitive to disturbance. Not because people are weak, but because the inner world has become overloaded. This is why peace requires simplification internally. Not simplification of possessions alone. Simplification of interpretation. The Stoics often practiced asking themselves, what is actually true right now? Not the fear. Not the assumption. Not the story. Use the truth of the moment. This creates emotional grounding. Because the human mind easily drifts into imagined realities. And imagined realities often create imagined suffering. Someone may spend an entire evening emotionally upset about a future conversation that never even happens. Another person may replay a 10-second interaction repeatedly for days. The body reacts as if the event is still occurring. This is how mental exhaustion quietly accumulates. Not only through life itself, but through repeated internal replay. And perhaps one of the greatest acts of wisdom is learning when to stop replaying. Not through force, but through understanding. Because replaying the same thought endlessly rarely produces clarity. Usually it produces emotional fatigue. The Stoics understood that peace requires knowing when thinking has become unhelpful. This matters greatly because modern culture often glorifies overthinking as responsibility. But overthinking is not always wisdom. Sometimes it is fear disguised as preparation. And fear keeps the nervous system trapped in anticipation. Always bracing. Always scanning. Always preparing for emotional impact. But the body cannot remain in this state forever without exhaustion. This is why calm people often seem slower internally. Not unintelligent. Not disconnected. Simply less reactive. They allow space between stimulus and response. And inside that space, peace survives. This is also why acceptance is so powerful in Stoicism. Acceptance is often misunderstood as weakness. But true acceptance is clarity. It means seeing reality without immediately entering resistance. For example, a thing happens. The resisting mind says, "This should not be happening." The calmer mind says, "This is part of being human." Change happens. The resisting mind panics. The calmer mind adapts. People misunderstand us. The resisting mind becomes consumed. The calmer mind recognizes that complete control over perception was never possible anyway. Acceptance removes enormous emotional friction from life. And friction is exhausting. Imagine walking against strong wind all day. Eventually the body tires. The mind experiences something similar when constantly resisting reality internally. Stoicism teaches a gentler relationship with reality. Not passive resignation. Peaceful cooperation with what already exists. And strangely, this creates strength rather than weakness. Because emotional energy stops leaking into constant internal battles. The mind becomes clearer. And clarity changes behavior naturally. A clear mind speaks more carefully. Listens more fully. Sleeps more deeply. Responds less impulsively. Inner peace begins shaping outer life quietly. Not dramatically. Like water smoothing stone over time. The Stoics also understood another subtle truth. Much suffering comes from believing every emotional state must be solved immediately. But emotions often move like weather. They arrive. Shift. Pass. A peaceful person does not panic every time emotional clouds appear. They trust movement. This trust matters deeply. Because so many people become trapped not by emotions themselves, but by fear of emotions. Fear of sadness. Fear of uncertainty. Fear of loneliness. Fear of disappointment. And fear creates additional suffering around already temporary experiences. But when a person learns they can survive emotional movement without collapsing, something softens internally. Life feels less threatening. The nervous system relaxes. Breathing deepens. Ordinary moments become accessible again. And perhaps this is why Stoicism feels timeless. It does not promise permanent happiness. It offers something more stable. Inner steadiness. The ability to remain connected to yourself even while life changes around you. And this steadiness is not built through dramatic transformation. It grows quietly through daily perspective. Small moments of awareness. Small acts of letting go. Small reductions in unnecessary mental resistance. Over time, these small shifts create enormous internal change. Because peace is rarely built all at once. It is built through hundreds of moments where a person chooses clarity over emotional chaos. And once this understanding deepens, a natural question emerges. How can someone begin living this way in ordinary daily life? Not perfectly. Not philosophically. But practically. The Stoics had a surprisingly gentle answer to that too. One of the most beautiful things about Stoicism is that it does not demand perfection. It simply invites awareness. Small awareness. Daily awareness. The kind that slowly changes how a person experiences ordinary life. Many people imagine inner peace must come from dramatic transformation. A completely different life. A retreat somewhere quiet. A sudden breakthrough. But often, peace enters through very small adjustments in attention. For example, one simple Stoic practice is pausing before reacting. Not suppressing emotion. Just pausing. A difficult message arrives. A frustrating situation appears. Someone speaks impatiently. Instead of immediately reacting emotionally, the Stoics practiced creating a small moment of space first. Instead of that pause, something important happens. The mind remembers. I do not have to become every emotion I feel. That single realization can change entire relationships, conversations, and days. Another gentle practice is reducing unnecessary mental involvement. Not every opinion requires emotional investment. Not every disagreement requires correction. Not every irritation deserves attention. This saves enormous emotional energy. Many peaceful people quietly learned the art of selective attention. They stopped feeding every disturbance. And because of that, their minds became quieter. This also applies to the past. Many people continue carrying old emotional weight long after the moment itself has ended. Old conversations. Old regrets. Old versions of themselves. But Stoicism gently reminds us. The past can inform the present. Without imprisoning it. A person can learn from yesterday without emotionally living there forever. This creates space for renewal. And renewal matters deeply. Because people change. The self you were 10 years ago is not fully the self sitting here today. Yet many people continue defining themselves through outdated emotional identities. Stoicism softens this rigidity. It allows a person to evolve peacefully. To release old internal narratives gradually. To stop carrying identities built entirely around pain, pressure, or performance. There is also great peace in simplifying daily life mentally. Not rushing every moment. Not filling every silence. Not treating rest as laziness. The Stoics valued stillness because stillness reveals what constant noise hides. Sometimes clarity does not arrive through more thinking. Sometimes it arrives when thinking finally slows down. This is why quiet routines become powerful. Morning walks. Slow breathing. Reading a few pages calmly. Watching sunlight move through a room. Sitting outside in silence. Simple practices restore the nervous system because they reconnect attention with the present moment. And presence is deeply healing. Not because it solves every problem. But because it stops the mind from living everywhere except here. Another Stoic practice involves remembering what truly matters. These sound simple, but modern life constantly distracts people from essentials. People become consumed by urgency while forgetting meaning. Yet near the end of life, most people rarely wish they had worried more. Usually, they wish they had been more present, more connected, more peaceful, more available emotionally for ordinary moments. Stoicism helps return attention to these things before life passes too quickly. Not through fear, through clarity. The Stoics also encouraged gratitude, though not in a forced or artificial way. Not pretending life is perfect. Simply recognizing what already exists quietly. A conversation. A healthy morning. A moment of calm. A friend. A quiet evening. A breath. The mind naturally focuses on what is missing. But peace often grows through noticing what is already here. And perhaps one of the gentlest Stoic practices of all is this. Stop demanding that every moment feel extraordinary. Many people unintentionally create suffering because they expect life to constantly feel exciting, meaningful, or emotionally intense. But real peace often feels ordinary. Soft mornings. Simple meals. Steady routines. Quiet evenings. Nothing dramatic, yet deeply nourishing. The Stoics understood this deeply. A calm life may not always appear impressive externally, but internally it feels spacious, breathable. And perhaps this is the kind of richness many people secretly long for now. Not more stimulation, more peace, more mental quiet, more emotional steadiness, more freedom from internal pressure. And the beautiful thing is, this path remains available at any age. A person does not need to become perfect first. They simply begin noticing. Noticing where unnecessary tension lives. Noticing what drains peace. Noticing what actually matters. Little by little, life becomes lighter internally. Not because reality changed completely, but because the relationship with reality changed. And once that relationship softens, something deeply healing begins unfolding naturally. Which brings us to the final realization of the Stoic path. The realization that peace was never something to chase endlessly. It was something waiting beneath the noise all along. Perhaps inner peace is not a destination. Perhaps it is what remains when unnecessary struggle finally loosens its grip. Not the healthy effort of living. Not responsibility. Not caring. But the constant internal fighting. Fighting reality. Fighting the uncertainty. Fighting change. Fighting the present moment. The Stoics understood that much of life becomes lighter when a person stops turning every experience into resistance. And this does not happen overnight. It unfolds gradually. One calmer reaction at a time. One released thought at a time. One quiet moment of awareness at a time. Eventually, something shifts internally. The mind no longer needs to control every outcome to feel safe. Silence becomes comfortable again. Ordinary moments become enough again. And perhaps this is what true freedom really feels like. Not escaping life, but no longer being emotionally trapped by every movement within life. Because life will continue changing. People will continue being imperfect. The future will remain uncertain. Some seasons will feel easier than others. But the peaceful person no longer demands that reality become perfectly smooth before allowing themselves calm. That changes everything. There is deep wisdom in realizing. You do not need to solve every part of life today. You do not need to carry every possible future in your mind. You do not need to emotionally wrestle with every passing thought. Sometimes peace begins simply by sitting quietly and allowing this moment to be enough. The Stoics believed that peace grows through alignment with reality rather than resistance against it. And strangely, this creates emotional resilience. Because the mind becomes less fragile, less reactive, less dependent on perfect conditions. A person begins trusting themselves more deeply. Not because they control life completely, but because they learn they can meet life calmly. That trust becomes a quiet foundation. And maybe this is what many people are truly searching for now. Not constant happiness. Not perfection. Just relief from internal heaviness. A softer relationship with their own minds. A way of living where breathing feels easier again. Where evenings feel calmer. Where thoughts slow down. Where simple moments regain meaning. And perhaps the most beautiful part of the Stoic path is this. It does not ask you to become someone else. It simply asks you to stop carrying what was never truly yours to carry. Other people's opinions. Imagined futures. Permanent control. Endless mental replay. Little by little, these burdens can be set down. And underneath them, something surprisingly peaceful often appears. Not a perfect life. Just a clearer one. A quieter one. A life where the mind finally understands. I do not need to fight every moment in order to live it. That realization alone can feel like exhaling after years of tension. So if your mind has been tired lately, if life has felt mentally crowded, if peace has felt strangely distant, maybe nothing is fundamentally wrong with you. Maybe you have simply been carrying too much internally for too long. And maybe the next chapter of your life does not require becoming stronger in the way you once believed. Maybe it requires becoming lighter. Lighter in thought. Lighter in resistance. Lighter in the need to control everything. Because peace rarely arrives through force. It arrives when the mind finally stops gripping so tightly. And when that happens, even ordinary life begins feeling different. The morning air feels calmer. Conversations feel slower. Silence feels warmer. Time feels less aggressive. Life itself has not completely changed. But your relationship with life has. And in the end, that may be the real Stoic path to inner peace. Not escaping reality, but learning how to stand gently inside it. If this helped you see things differently, consider subscribing for more reflections on Stoicism, clarity, and inner peace.